SCP-610 Object Class Kita. Special Containment Procedures. Due to the vast area of infection SCP-610 covers, containment is impossible. Isolation of the area has proved far more effective, and permission has been granted by the Russian government to establish a perimeter to keep people out of these areas under the guise of military operations. Should any organism displaying traits consistent with SCP-610 be sighted near this perimeter, then the established protocol requires it to be engaged at a range with small arms until immobile, then dispatched using incendiary weapons and munitions from as great a distance as possible. Any living thing comes in physical contact with this organism infected with SCP-610 is considered expendable and to be immediately terminated and incinerated. Any persons coming from within 3 meters of SCP-610 infected life are to be immediately withdrawn from the area, be isolated from the rest of their team, and subjected to a medical examination using only remote techniques to determine if infection has occurred and appropriate steps taken based on that determination. At present, the known infection vectors for SCP-610 spread seem to be focused on physical contact. Drone movements within the heavily infected areas have returned air samples containing minute particles which, when exposed to organic compounds, will result in the spread of SCP-610. The results of these particular tests have revealed that most require several days to manifest, if at all, with the exception of direct contact with exposed lung and liver tissue. These particular tests show a rapid rate of growth, which requires incineration of the testing environment no more than 24 hours after initial exposure, with even a 2-hour mishap risking a compromised facility event. Given this kind of rapid growth only occurs in organic material existing outside the human body, this form of infection is currently considered a minor concern. These peculiarities have given rise to a series of questions regarding the possible origin of the infection in conjunction with the failed containment protocol remains at a scorched earth policy at this time, and no concern for transmission via water or air at infection parameters exist barring situational changes in the field. Description: Initial reports of SCP-610 came direct from the Russian government through undisclosable channels. These reports consisted primarily of disappearances of farmers in the region and were not considered until the local police, followed by the regional police, and finally a government-dispatched agent, all failed to report within the 72-hour period. A small military contingent was dispatched to the area and quickly withdrew, at which point the Foundation was contacted to investigate. The area SCP-610 affects is close to Lake Baikal in southern Siberia. Areas of known infestation are marked on a map provided to us here. Containment perimeters are marked in blue surrounding these infested areas, and as of present, no further locations have been identified. Incursions into the perimeter must be reported prior to conducting, confirmed during exploration, and debriefed on immediate following return. SCP-610 appears to be a contagious skin disease at first, with symptoms including rash, itching, and increased skin sensitivity. Within 3 hours, the disease will cause blemishes resembling heavy scar tissue to form in the chest and arm areas, spreading to the legs and back within an additional hour, consuming the victim completely within 5 hours. Exposure to high temperature vastly decreased the time for the contagion to spread, and complete infestations have been recorded to occur in as little as 5 minutes. After the completion of the infection occurs, and the victim's life functions will cease for approximately 3 minutes, after which they will restart at a 2.3 times the activity rate of a normal human. Following this, the scar tissue on the victims will start to move on its own accord and grow at a rapid rate. Normal human features start to disappear at this point under the infection, and the path of mutation appears to be largely random. Subjects observed in this stage of infection have been recorded as growing 3 or more limbs of a type, such as arms or legs. The head may become misshapen and elongated or widened out, and the parts of the subject may split open, from which additional branches of flesh will grow. The duration of this stage of infection is unknown, and not all subjects appear to progress to the later stages. Under unknown conditions, an infected individual will cease moving and place itself in a location it deems suitable to take root. The fleshy growth on the victim will then begin to spread itself across all surrounding objects and consume them. Such objects do not spread the infection as living creatures do, however, and the effect of the prolonged contact with these objects is recorded later in this document. It is assumed that this behavior is to create an area hospitable to continued growth of the other infected. Observation of life infected by SCP-610 by staff is impossible. These infected with the disease immediately seek aid as normal human impulses, resulting in unintended infection. These infected pass the scar tissue phase actively and aggressively attempt to infect anyone approaching them within an undefined area. As it has been established that should an infected be capable of sight and observe an uninfected, it will proceed toward them. If the infected has lost the ability of sight, a range of approximately 30 meters is considered safe. Observation of SCP-610 infected settlements have been established using artificial methods such as remote robots. The data returned by these observations, coupled with the openly aggressive nature of the infected in an attempt to spread SCP-610, have resulted in the Kita classification. However, so long as nothing is allowed to enter or leave the infected areas, it is considered a neutralized threat. Of concern are the cavernous areas beneath the infected settlements that were discovered during the exploration, and attempts to get research personnel into these areas are underway. After establishing the containment perimeter for SCP-610, the Russian government approved a request to research and investigate the area. For the first such exploration, a small camera-mounted unit known as Herbie was dispatched a safe distance and directed towards Site A. Herbie has a battery life of 12 hours and control range far wider than is required for this dispatch. Herbie is able to enter Site A without incident. The landscape around Site A shows early stages of assimilation by singular SCP-610 infected who have fallen at largely random intervals around what remains of the village. Many homes appear to have suffered fire damage long put out. However, a fair amount remain intact. Aerial reconnaissance of Site A, combined with thermal imaging, has put it at an estimated population of 79 infected. Immobile infected are included in this number. However, it's difficult to ascertain an exact percentage of mobile versus immobile. Varying degrees of physical mutation due to SCP-610 are present in Site A, and it's assumed that all the inhabitants are in an advanced stage of infection. Herbie observed the exterior of the village for 2 hours, during which all infected behaved in what appeared to be a loose sense of social structure. Because Herbie remained stationary during this observation period, it's unknown precisely what each individual infected person was doing. However, the central plaza experienced occasional bursts of activity and downtime, requiring more information. Herbie was directed to follow an infected as it entered their home. There is a bumpy camera feed as Herbie scouts over the gravel behind the quickly shambling infected person. The interior of its home is the same as that attached to the primary file of SCP-610. The infected being tailed is one of the sitting one at the table. After entering the home, Herbie's camera was raised slowly as not to draw attention. This action was either unnoticed or ignored. The infected person is watching from the doorway as it hobbles around the home and stops at each of the other visible infected organisms. However, it appears to ignore the one under the table, which, while not immobile, does not leave that area. What this creature was before infection is unclear. After lapping the table and repeating this procedure 3 times, the primary infected person, known as Alpha henceforth, stops at the bedridden infected, known as Beta, and proceeds to assault it with furious punches. Beta is unable to leave the bed for unknown reasons, but is not completely immobile as it flails its arms in response to the beatings delivered by Alpha. After several sustained minutes of this beating, a piercing sound explodes from the area behind Beta, who then proceeds to project a cloud of unknown matter into the air from its chest cavity. Alpha lingers in the cloud as it floats in the air around them, slowly descending to the ground. The unknown life form on the table aside, Beta begins to twitch in an apparent seizure, and Alpha then laps the room twice more, stopping again at each infected organism, but still ignoring the one under the table as well as Beta now. Those 2 laps, Alpha seats itself at the table and reaches out to position the 3 plates atop it as if setting a dinner set. After the plates are positioned, the facial tendrils extend from Alpha, wiggling up and start to curl one of the plates before tearing apart and separating. This is repeated at each plate. The image attached to SCP-10's primary file is a still image of this occurrence. After each plate is filled with Alpha's flesh, it leaves the table and approaches Herbie, which is moved from Alpha's path. Alpha leaves the home, but Herbie's camera remains focused on the table. After several minutes, a group comprised of 6 to 7 infected enter the room from outside, still ignoring Herbie. Each infected shambles as if movement is difficult, jerking in large steps or squirming in small ones. These infected all surround the table and each take turns grabbing handfuls of the flesh substance left behind by Alpha, pressing it whatever orifice on themselves as they can. Some into mouths, some into the chest, some behind their backs, some under the arms. When all the plates are empty, this group leaves. Herbie remains here for several more minutes before retracting its camera and leaving. Immediately after leaving the home, Herbie collides with an object. Panning the camera around, the obstruction appears to be Alpha, whose facial tendrils are intermingling with another infected having similar mutations. The impact is ignored and the 2 infected part ways after several minutes. Herbie is then directed to explore more areas of the village. The remains of whatever appears to have been a store show signs the severe fire damage as well as activity inside the building, which Herbie moves to investigate. The door is slightly ajar, and with some firm movements of Herbie it is pushed open. No notice is taken of this action, or it is ignored. Inside the store are several infected persons, most of whom are standing around. However, one on the ground is rolling back and forth over the space of approximately 0.3 meters, or 1 foot, and is ignored by the others. Herbie rolls on the divider separating the cashier area from the customer area and pans around the counter. The upper half of a person is protruding from a cellar door behind the counter. This person does not appear to be suffering from advanced infection and wears the garb of a Russian soldier. Herbie zooms the camera in to confirm identification as it notices the eyes of this person are in constant movement, often focusing on Herbie. The rest of the soldier does not move. Herbie is directed to leave this area and proceeded to the back of the room. In this storage area, a large pile of bodies are stacked together. Some pieces of clothing are visible and appear to contain both military garb and everyday clothing. No facial features are discernible on any of the bodies due to the way they are stacked. Atop the bodies, an affected sits, appearing to have its lower parts fused to the pile, with its upper half in a wild state of flailing seizures. Approximately every 10 seconds a burst of spores flies out of the top of this infected which linger in the air. Herbie is directed to leave the building. After leaving this building, Herbie passes by the village well.
surrounding which are a series of immobile infected, all facing the well. The arms of each of these infected persons are stretched out, one in contact with the next, forming a perfect chain, save for one whose arms are down at its sides. Herbie passes by this last infected to approach what appears to have been the town hall or mayor's building, when the infected becomes mobile and snatches the rover up. Video feed from Herbie focuses on the face of the infected, which is strangely in perfect shape given the conditions of the rest of the body, which is horribly bloated. This infected was once a young girl from appearance, aged estimated 10 to 12. Herbie is rolled side to side in his grip as its face stares motionless at the rover. The infected's face suddenly balloons in size and explodes outwards into a series of fleshy flaps that grip Herbie and draw it inside. Herbie's video feed terminates here. Herbie was considered lost at this point. However, no one at control remembered to turn off the video feed, assuming it cut. 5 hours later, Herbie's video feed resumed, stationary and at a raised level pointing at the upper rim of the village well. The video feed contains some blur to what appears to be a slimy film which often oozes across the lens, but when not obscured provides perfect quality recording. Herbie does not respond to any remote commands, but its video jerks back and forth from target to target, zooming in and out on its own accord. Video feed is cut manually and all connections to the Herbie's unit are ordered erased.
During construction of the perimeter surrounding SCP-610 containment area, several Class D personnel were infected due to assaults from infected villagers or animals roaming the area, in addition to a number of infections as a result of escape attempt and careless behavior. Most of these infected personnel were immediately destroyed with flamethrowers. However, a small collection of infected were contained in cold storage units, which prolonged the inevitable progression of SCP-610's mutative properties. The decision was made to utilize some of these infected personnel as video relays and dispatch them into nearby sites. Due to the concern of the loss of equipment as evidenced in SCP-610-L1, all 3 subjects were used. In this manner was sent in with a large video system to Site C. Additional equipment issued for this dispatch included 1 gallon container of gasoline, 3 emergency flares, 3 9mm pistols with 3 magazines of ammo each, 3 single-serving food rations. The infected personnel were instructed to observe and avoid interaction with the infected villagers, but could a situation arise where they were met with aggression or feel they are losing themselves to SCP-610's influence, they are free to kill as many infected villagers as they so choose and do as much damage to the infected objects and properties as possible while maintaining video feed. The intent of this order was to provide data for SCP-610's infected community in a raid situation so a plan of eradication could be better established. At this time, the expedition Site C was suspected to be a possible origin point of SCP-610, having far fewer mobile infected than any other site, as well as structures which appear to have been layered over several times with the terraforming effects of the immobile infected. Dispatch C D-Class personnel, known henceforth as DI-1, DI-2, DI-3, were directed to pay particular attention to anything that could be considered an origin point for SCP-610.
The trek from our perimeter camp to Site C was uneventful. There was no evidence of any native animal life in the area. As Site C is approached, there is a noticeable rise in the temperature within the last 30 meters of the trip that necessitates removal of the heavy cold-based coverings that were provided. The temperature rises again sharply at the entrance to Site C proper, which requires a further shedding of garments for fear of heat stroke. Site C is described as being heavily humid and around 32 degrees Celsius or 89 Fahrenheit. One of the first immediately noticed traits about Site C is an array of immobile pylons, which encircled what is believed to be the entry to the site. Separate by a apparent distance, of 5 to 6 meters each. Pylons appear to be 2 to 4 infected persons fused together in one spot. On some of these pylons, features such as faces or anuses are still visible, in addition to other holes which do not naturally occur, all appearing to act as heat vents. Where the heat is generated is unknown. Current belief is that this is an advanced stage of SCP-610's terraforming its environment to facilitate spread of itself. DI-2, who was furthest along in the progression of SCP-610 of the tree by a number of hours, began to seizure after only a few minutes in Site C during the examination of the pylons. The progression to the scar tissue phase of SCP-610 infection is observed in full course as DI-2 spasms on the ground, his entire body being overtaken by sickly tan flesh almost entirely after 45 seconds. DI-2 is terminated by gunshots from DI-1 and his equipment left where it is. The spread of SCP-610 over DI-2 continues even after death of the body until all movement ceases. As perimeter controls relaying new instructions to DI-1 and DI-3 regarding the situation, there is a shift in the ground covering in Site C, where DI-2's body is. Video feed shows the fresh-like growth splitting open beneath his body and a series of ropey tendrils coming from within to grab and pull the corpse inside. This opening closes up quickly. Total time elapsed 3 seconds. As DI-1 and DI-3 decide to act quickly in these hotter temperatures, fearing the same fate, they proceed to the village center and encounter another previously unknown phenomena. In the precise center of town, rising above what was the community well, is a sphere suspended by an angled support comprised of SCP-610's flesh. This ball is riddled with the features of humans in early stages of SCP-610 infection, as well as a good number assumed to be in later stages. The number of specimens of non-human life, such as a deer and a bear, are also visible within the mass. This entire sphere of flesh pulses at a roughly 5-second interval, and with each pulse emits a ring of spore-like material from its equator. This material floats to the ground and appears to be absorbed into the converted environment. DI-3 begins to douse the sphere with the provided gasoline, and then, questioned by a panicked DI-1, explains that this looks like a good thing to burn as any. At this point, perimeter control has ceased giving commands due to the rapid deterioration of events. There is no reaction from anything within Site C to any of these activity until the precise moment at which a lit emergency flare is applied to the spherical mass, which immediately goes up in flames. The remote feed plays a noise from an unknown location that seems to come from the location far outside of Site C, but was reported as being heard at the perimeter control by both Site C and A. This noise is described as both explosive, as if multiple high-yield charges were detonated on the mountainside, and alive, like a large feral creature roaring. Within 15 seconds following the sound's dissipation, Site A reported that a series of explosions had occurred within the village. 5 seconds after this report, the spherical mass in the middle of Site C explodes. DI-1 and DI-3 are thrown by the blast. DI-3 is confirmed deceased by DI-1 after regaining his footing, having suffered injury from a stone shrapnel from the well. DI-1 is able to report he has bruises and rearing ears, but aside from the rapidly spreading SCP-610 infection, he suffered no blast damage. During this recording of footage, DI-1 has his video equipment removed and was looking into it. Due to the angle of the recording, it's unknown precisely what occurred in Site C, but something draws DI-1's attention back to the center of town, where he stares for several moments and then is pulled in the opposite direction. The video equipment is falling to the ground and recording in a skyward direction. The last moments of footage from DI-1's video unit displaying a humanoid figure moving through the air, followed by the sound of an impact in the same direction. Within 3 seconds of this event, an unknown creature steps up upon the recording video equipment and destroys it. Perimeter control remains on high alert for a full 24 hours at all locations without any incident following this event.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed that little outing into the background of SCP-610. After having talked so much about the Church of the Broken God, I thought it was about time we explored one of their main antagonists. And if you enjoy SCP, you might enjoy our own multiverse stories about the Association of Ishtar. Please adhere to proper containment protocols and press the subscribe button, including the little bell beside it. And that is the end of this presentation.